Arlene McCarthy, you lobbied yourself for continued European funding for the North West. Now we have the figures. How do they look for Merseyside in particular?
Well, I mean, I spent the last 2 years really, practically since I was re-elected, making sure that Merseyside, and the North West indeed, gets its fair share of EU funding. Our initial reaction was that we were very shocked to see actually that Merseyside is suffering quite a cut. We don't have the exact figures, but I think it's in the order of at least 100 million, if not more. And that means to us that this government has actually not applied the formula that the EU and we as legislators agreed. We voted in the parliamentary committee to apply rules based on allocation of money, on unemployment levels, GDP. Merseyside still qualifies as a transitional region coming out of a poor region status, and therefore does deserve to have its fair share of European funding.
You mentioned that there is this European formula. Can you just explain a little bit more on why you think the British government hasn't stuck to that?
Well, because the formula is related to what your GDP level is, and Merseyside still has a low GDP, it still has high unemployment. What that doesn't mean for the government is that they can decide on the basis of who they want to give money to, that they give a bigger allocation to areas that they favour for whatever reason, because the problem we have in trying to get to the bottom of this unfair allocation is the government has refused to reveal how it's allocated the money. So that's totally non-transparent. We must have transparency. The EU Commission is transparent on how it says the government should allocate. The government has not followed the formula, and therefore, with the Mayor of Liverpool, I will be challenging the government's allocation, and I'm asking the Commission not to approve this allocation of funding until we get to the bottom of why we've had an unfair allocation, and we redress that, we correct it and we get it right.
What power does the European Commission have to step in if it agrees with your argument that this has been done unfairly?
Well, I've asked them to block the decision because they have to approve the rules. So they have to approve how the UK government has made this allocation. Of course, the government is arguing that it is the EU that actually forced them to reassess how they allocated the money. That's not true. It's simply not true. And what they cannot say is that the formula meant that they could interpret this in a way that meant that they give money to who they chose to give money to, regardless of need or deprivation.
You say in your press release that Merseyside's loss, if you like, is the devolved region's gain. Can you just explain a little bit more?
Well, what we've heard in very confused, I have to say, and garbled language from the government is that, of course, everyone did take a cut, and that's because the budget has been cut for the EU generally, and we were in favour of not having a big exploding budget for the EU. But in those budget cuts, then everyone has to take a fair cut. What they have argued is that they believe that the cut would have been harder on the devolved regions, and because the devolved regions are devolved, therefore they are entitled to more money, even though they don't deserve it in terms of their level of deprivation or their unemployment levels. That simply is not fair, it's not right, and just because this government abolished regional development agencies and has given us no regional voice with government in Westminster does not mean they can rob us of resources that we need actually for jobs and growth on Merseyside.
Do you think it's the case, for example, that if we take Wales as an example, we've seen Carwyn Jones, the First Minister, very actively lobbying on this issue. Do you think it's the case that they've been able to make a stronger case for their own part of the country?
Well, maybe, but it is the job of government to be fair. It's not the job of government actually to make fair allocations on the basis of a formula that was given to them, that we voted for. We as parliamentarians spent 3 years working on a formula to actually make sure that those in the most need and deprivation with the highest levels of unemployment do get the resources that they justly deserve. But this is not just about the devolved regions. I have my suspicions, and we have to get to the bottom of how they allocated the money, that some of this money has gone outside of the poorer regions in the UK and has gone into regions actually, particularly into the Midlands and into the southwest, the southeast actually, where the deprivation is not as high, and that the government has to justify. And they have to justify it to the Commission before the Commission signs off these allocations.
Just going back to the case of Wales, do you accept that they do have particular problems with deprivation and therefore should be treated a bit differently?
No, I think that all of the regions that are in the same category. That is the former kind of Objective 1 areas of Scotland, Wales, the North East, etc. Those are regions that do deserve additional funding alongside with Merseyside. The problem is how much cuts you make across that and where you allocate those resources. And my real question to the government is whether they have slid some of that money for the more deserving regions, that includes Scotland and Wales, into the lesser deprived areas of England because it suits them politically to do that.
So you've actually written to the European Commissioner. How else are you hoping to press this issue?
Well, we're hoping to get a one-to-one meeting with the Commissioner now and basically to encourage him to challenge what we consider to be an unfair, a non-transparent allocation, and to get to the bottom of why the government has allocated in this way, flouting the EU rules and the allocation criteria. And indeed, we want it redressed. We need to have this corrected.
What impact, as the figures stand at the moment, will that have on a region like your own in terms of concrete things that people will see or perhaps won't now see in Merseyside?
Well, we've got a very good record in Merseyside of having, massive waterfront regeneration, lots of opportunities for, particularly younger people, youth to get into job training schemes, small businesses we funded with this money. And, if you talk about 100 odd million, and it could be anything from between 100 and 200 million, of course, that's the grant element, the match funding element of that brings that up actually to 400, 500 million potentially. Once you add in public and private sector funding, it's an enormous amount of a finance and a boost that gives to the region, which we will have lost if this government has, as I suspect, made an unfair allocation which is penalising Merseyside.